You don't want to say it? You sure? What's going on, everybody? Jeremy here from Satera Tuning. What? We got another special guest with us. Aubrey, say hi.
Hi.
What happened today? You got your cast off?
I got a cast off and I got a blue thing.
And the blue thing. All right. So, Tulo's on vacation, and Daddy had to go and help get her cast off. So, we're going to do this.
Mommy and my daddy went to the appointment.
Yep.
And I can't start the phone!
Oh, okay. So, we're going to do the live from the house. So, what?
Make sure to turn the phone if I talk.
Okay, so when you talk, you want me to turn the phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
But not yet.
Oh, not yet. Okay. Anyway, so the topic of discussion this week, we have, we posted.
Something along with it, and something. I can't.
You're going to make this difficult on us here. So we have a couple Hellcat Superchargers for sale. So naturally, we get a lot of people interested in us installing them on their 5.7, their 6.4's.
I got cucumbers on my eyes.
Are you going to put cucumbers back on your eyes?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So, we thought, you know what? We see it on the internet all the time. We get asked it all the time. On top of overall Hellcat swap, right? We had an engine for sale, and a lot of people asked us for quotes on putting it in their non-Hellcat. What are the pros, the cons, the benefits? So,
I'm not going to take this off. I'm going to go for 30 minutes.
Just going to make this difficult. Okay, so we'll start with putting a supercharger onto a 5.7 and a 6.4. So, is it beneficial? Is it worth it, right? This is going to be a great could you, should you, and we're going to just kind of get right into it. So, could you install a Hellcat Supercharger onto a 5.7 or 6.4? Yes, you can. Many of people have done it, but it's not as straightforward as a lot of people think, okay? So, to kind of break down why, the alignment, right? Supercharger alignment on it. Hellcats have a 10 rib setup that's put inwards from the normal crank pulley and serpentine setup. So right out of the gate, if you're just going to try and bolt it on, that's an issue. On top of it, the bolt pattern for non-Hellcats is different than that of, Hellcats. So you need adapters, right? You need a bolt-on adapter. So naturally, you got to purchase those. And then you got to extend your belt, get tensioners, idlers, and stuff like that if you're going to run a 6-rib setup off your factory serpentine. So it takes a lot more work than most people think. Then you also have to get a heat exchanger, a coolant pump, run those hoses, wire them in, whether you do it off a 12-volt signal. Yes, dear?
I can't see the phone.
You want to see the phone? Okay. So, between that, the price adds up, right? It adds up very, very quickly. And yes, I know. So that being said, it's not as cheap as you think. I understand when you see that supercharger for $1,500, $2,000, right? You're like, oh man, it's going to be a good deal. I can get boost for cheap. It's really not once you start adding up all of the things that go into it. So you got to consider that. So spacers, pulleys, tensioners, coolant pump, heat exchanger, hoses, the actual installation, the fuel system. Now, you have brands like Whipple, Magnuson, Vortec, ProCharger that make everything bolt on and ready to go, right? They're set up so you just plug and play. It comes with everything you need, and it's designed for your specific vehicle. So, that's one of those things you really got to consider it from all angles, right?
And something I can't,
right.
And I'm gonna take my cast off, and I'm gonna take a blue thing off, and I'm gonna be healed.
Yes, and you can go on the monkey bars.
Yeah, but I'm not going on the monkey bars yet.
Okay,
but
we'll wait.
Somebody's talking.
So, all right, so that's kind of the a la carte way, as I like to call it, to put it on a 5.7, 6.4. You got to get all of those things. Now, there's the other way, the 10 rib conversion, where instead of having to, a lot of people get a grip tech pulley and flip it around and put it on backwards, right, to extend it out. Instead of doing that way, you can do the full Hellcat conversion. Again, you'll need the spacers to be able to apply and bolt the supercharger to the heads, okay? Now you need a front timing chain cover, all the pulleys, the tensioners, the arrangement for that, change the radiator hoses around and all of that. Oil pan has to change, so, you know, it adds up. It adds up super quick, and that's why we just don't see it being that beneficial. Now, the blower is a great blower for what it is, right? 2.4 liter, 2.7, depending on the one you get. And obviously, they make power when done correctly. Now, that's the other thing to consider is crank pulley size. So we're going to go back to a base 5.7, 6.4, where guys just want to bolt it on and not do the 10 rib conversion. You can't spin the blower as fast as a Hellcat does, right? Because a 17, 18% lower overdrive ATI pulley is still smaller than a factory Hellcat lower pulley in regards to blower RPM, right? So to do so, to achieve power, you have to overspin the blower with an upper pulley. So then you start getting into belt slips sooner. So it's those things a lot of people don't consider as well. Same reason why like Whipple 3.0s on 5.7 392s don't make as much power on Hellcats, because it's a struggle to spin them faster or fast enough with the 6 rib versus the Hellcat 10 rib. So it's not only the surface area, but it's the fact of the actual RPM the blower can achieve. So yeah, if you just do a basic stock sized, you know, upper and a stock lower with a 6 rib setup, it'll make super low boost, which is what you want in a stock setup, but the cost is just not worth it in my opinion. So the should you of this is I really don't think it's worth it. You know, it adds up so quick, and there are other options that I feel are more efficient and just do on the pure design is better for that given application. Now, if you're getting down the road of just a massive build, you know, we've done a lot of 10 rib conversions on 392 base builds so they can spin Hellcat blowers or Whipples or Magnusons a lot faster for those 4-digit numbers, then that's a different story. But again, if you look at the cost, yeah, same thing for 6.1's, right? It's the same thing to try to get any type of power out of it, out of a factory Hellcat blower. It just doesn't work. You know, but again, it's assessing the whole overall situation. You know, cost to get a 392 to do all of that stuff is very, very expensive. So could you install a Hellcat Supercharger? Just a quick recap, because I see the number of viewers going up.
Like that is really don't make it, and I like to see that.
Okay.
And something like that.
All
Goodbye.
right. Goodbye. So, could you install a Hellcat Supercharger on a 6.157 392? You could, yes. Should you? I don't think it's worth it. Even if you get a deal, even if you get the blower for free, it's still not optimal in regards to efficiency. It's not going to produce the type of power that you're expecting with thinking Hellcat power out of the gate, because you have to understand Hellcats spin them a lot faster from the factory. And as we've talked about, you know, when you have a supercharged application, an engine is only going to make as much horsepower as the blower itself is capable of flowing air. So, you know, that's like we talked about. If you have a 426 massive setup with big Thytech heads and everything like that, and you have a Hellcat Supercharger spinning at OEM speeds, it's going to make stock Hellcat power. It might make a bump in torque, but the overall peak horsepower is going to be the same, right? So you are limited still based on the blower application that you're putting into place. So the cost versus the benefit, just go buy a pre-made kit. Especially this day and age now. I understand years ago there wasn't a lot of support when the Hellcat first came out. You know, there weren't a lot of really good options. There's options now. So aftermarket's going to be the way to go in my opinion. So yeah? You just want the camera on you, don't you? Yeah.
And I like to have fun with my sister.
Do you like Daddy Dinosaur Truck, the TRX, or do you like the Charger more?
Charger more.
Charger, you like the Charger?
Yeah,
okay.
I just like that.
Okay, so votes out. Charger's the winner. All right, now, second part. Hellcat swapping. So let's say, again, we had engines for sale and people were reaching out like, oh, can you put it into my non-Hellcat, into my non-Durango Hellcat, into my Jeep SRT? Can you just do the swap? Now, technically, there's going to be two ways you can do the swap. And we're going to kind of cover the basis of both of them and the worth, right? We always talk about, is it worth it? Is it valuable to you to do so? The first one, which is the easier one, is literally pulling the engine out that you have. And
really always in a super potato, carrot, and banana. just called for Super Potato, and everyone just so good, and vegetables in space.
Okay, thank you. So, the first option is just pulling your engine out and putting your engine in using your factory computer, transmission, everything like that. Naturally, with doing it that way, you'll need like a smooth boost controller for the bypass valve. You use your factory harness. You just got to get an adapter or, offset the map sensor, because there's only one used on those factory computers on 5.7, 6.4, 6.1's, right? So you could do it that way. Is it worth it? The reality is, you do that, you'll make, 600, 650 to the wheels, depending on your application. It's reliable there, so if that's the power level you want. Basic bolt-ons to it, you can make more power. But then, if you go beyond that of just the stock engine capabilities, you are then going to have to dive into the fuel system. You're going to have to dive into potentially the transmission and so on and so forth. It can add up quickly, so it depends on that horsepower goal. So this comes down to cost versus what you get out of it, right? So this depends on, what what your goal is. If somebody calls me and says, hey, I just want 650 to the wheels, I think it's a good option. Absolutely. We know that's what's stock. They're designed to go hundreds of thousand miles technically in stock form. Bolt it in, get a proper tune, and send it. Not bad, right? You can pick up motors. We sell them on average for 10 to 12 grand and get the labor in it. Go for it, right? Even when you do a fuel system on it and bump it up a little bit, and then the transmission starts to go and so on and so forth, you start to lose a little bit of that value where it's worth it. But understand, some people think that these motors are invincible. And we have to, realize what are we comparing to? Do I just throw a aftermarket blower onto my 392 and then forge the motor? Or do I buy a Hellcat setup? That's normally the conversation we go down. So what are the pros and cons to each? Well, Hellcat swap, bolt in, ready to go for the most part, and you're off, right? But again, it's not invincible. So it is not a motor that is designed for 1,000 wheel horsepower plus. Although we do it, we explain and have the discussion with our customers about the potential risks. So it's knowing the limits, right? Now, if I do we'll say I have a Scat Pack. We'll just use that simple. Scat Pack 392. And I really want 750 to the wheels. Well, Hellcat swap it. You could do a fuel system with it because the factory fuel system can't handle it. And you're there, right? Okay, that's not bad. The other option is aftermarket blower and forging your motor. Now, this is where it kind of comes into play. When you forge your motor, it's technically stronger than that of a stock Hellcat engine. Okay, so it might cost a little bit more, but you are going to now have a stronger motor than that of a stock Hellcat one. So keep that in mind. Blower-wise, right? You have a factory Hellcat blower, or you have, let's say, a Whipple, or the Magnuson 2650, or even a centrifugal blower. The capabilities on those aftermarket blowers can be higher than that of a factory Hellcat blower. So again, the limits are higher. The capabilities are higher, right? So you have this ability now where you can make more power without having to worry. Where if you just do a Hellcat swap, there's a limit. So it might be cheaper initially, but if you want to continue to grow, it might not be the best option. So really the goals all come down to you, right? It comes down to what you want short-term and long-term. We always have this conversation with our customers. What do you want now and what do you want long-term? If somebody calls me and says, hey, I want 600 of the wheels now, but 1,000 in a year or so, I'm going to tell you don't put a Hellcat motor in it because you're going to have to pull it out and then build it anyways, right? So just start with what you have and build that 392, 5.7 and build it up, right? So those are things to consider there. And that's really what it comes down to. Now, the second option of a Hellcat swap is very different. This is where you basically are just using your current vehicle as a body loaner, okay? So that's when guys swap the Hellcat, the transmission, the rear subframe with the rear ends, all the modules, the radio, the dash, everything like that, okay? That's just a totally different thing altogether. That you're doing that because you got a deal on a complete vehicle that's crashed, or it's easier for you to do it in small increments versus buying a Hellcat, right? Sure, it's cool to have a 300, with a swap in it. I had one. Sure, it's awesome to see, you know, these Trackhawk swapped SRTs, right? And it all comes down to cost versus, you know, the benefit. And you can see all of these swapped vehicles for sale. They don't sell or go for that much more than what a stock 392 or a stock 300 or a stock WK2 would be. So understand that putting all that money into that to do that complete swap, it can get expensive. I mean, I understand there's some deals out there and stuff like that, but you're not going to be able to get back anything that you put into that. You know, and unless you're doing the work yourself or it's a weekend project thing and you're just going to chip away at it, you know, could you? Absolutely. Should you? That's up to you. I mean, yeah, I think a Hellcat Swap 300 is great. I wish they made one from the factory, don't we all? But, you know, it's one of those. People do it all the time, and they understand they're not getting it. Like, we had that Hellcat Swap Magnum. It was beautiful, right? Again, we wish that they made those from the factory, but the nightmares and the headaches you went through and everything, it's a beautiful vehicle. And he's just so far invested in it. He's just got to keep it and keep going, right? And these are the things to consider when we talk about doing something Hellcat in a non-Hellcat vehicle. So that's really the assessment. And we understand that, you know, sometimes I've built a ton of 392s that are faster than Hellcats. You know, and if in the grand scheme of things, when they assess how much money these people have put into the 392s, it might, you know, be the same, a little bit more than that of a Hellcat. But again, they're stronger, right? They have forged motors, they have built transmissions, complete fuel systems, and stuff like that. The only downside to it is if you ever try to go to sell the vehicle. As you guys know, I'm trying to sell my Charger Hellcat. At one point, it was a twin turbo, 1500 wheel horsepower Charger Hellcat that went 8s accidentally, right? Now it's literally just a stock red-eye swap, and nobody wants to buy it. So it just even goes to show you, Hellcats don't even, when modified, hold a value to an extent like that. I know that going into it, so it's just being smart about it. And just understand that sometimes this hobby of what we do, you are not going to get that money back. So the worth is up to you. I like the uniqueness of doing a full Hellcat swaps. I've kind of wanted to do it a couple times myself, but again, I assess the cost versus what I'm getting out of it. And I usually don't do it, but everybody's different, right? That's that coyote all the way. That's funny. So, you know, that's one of those things where it really comes up to you. So this isn't a should you where I can tell you yes or no. Yeah, we all do make poor financial decisions. Absolutely. I've made several too as well. Especially when you're in this hobby, you can't prevent it. It just happens. So that's really what it comes down to, guys. So a quick recap for those that are jumping in, because I see a bunch more. The first portion was, should you throw a Hellcat Supercharger on a non-Hellcat? So 6.157 My answer is no. It's not a reliable setup. It's not a very capable setup. The costs add up very quickly. And it's just that there's better options out there. Second portion we talked about was just putting a Hellcat long block with a blower into a non-Hellcat vehicle, utilizing everything else. Good option if you like a goal of 600, 650 wheel horsepower and you're done. If you are happy with that and that's what you want, it's a great option. But understand, if you do anything built via us or any shop, it's going to be stronger than that of a stock Hellcat. So understand, the stock Hellcat stuff is not invincible. So the growth potential is then limited, okay? And then the third and final was overall Hellcat swap. We're talking front to back modules, everything like that. From a performance standpoint, it's not the route to go, but cool factor, absolutely. Uniqueness, absolutely. Fun factor, you got it. It is just one of those very poor financial decisions, but it does check box all those other things. So that's pretty much it in regards to Hellcat implementation into non-Hellcats. We know they're superior. We understand there's a ton of engineering, and we all love it. And like I said, fact of the matter is, yes, can you build a Hellcat from the ground up utilizing a V6 chassis and then putting everything in it? Sure. Will it cost you less than maybe a Hellcat? Absolutely, but you're not going to get that back. So race car, go find a V6 chassis and then swap it in and then build it from there. Absolutely 100%, right? Because your end-all cost is going to be a lot less, and race cars don't get their money back. You know, we talk about that all the time. If you're going stupid big horsepower number, I know I said stupid, sorry. Bad word here. But we talk about it all the time in regards to if you're going to get to that point where 1500 plus, right, you have to replace everything on the car anyways. You just need a chassis, and then from that point forward, grab the right stuff and build it up from there. So, yeah, so that's pretty much that. So now we'll get into any questions that we might have from you guys watching and that we've had over the week. So I'll start with these. What would you say is better motors for running high boost, a 426 or 411? So understanding what those numbers mean, 426, 411, it's the cubic inches of displacement. That takes the bore and the stroke into consideration to determine your cubic inches. I think when you're talking from a 411 to 426, it's technically very little in regards to the differences. Now, what actually matters is the internals. To give an example, I would take a billet 426, which is what I had in my charger, over a 411 any day of the week. Those billet rods, billet crank are much stronger, going to be balanced better, technically probably a little less on the weight side, and that's going to be more reliable than that of a forged crank, forged rod 390 or 411 with H-beam rods, right? So it more so of what matters is the internals. Now, coming from my LS days when I was a GM guy, we stuck around that 406, 408 and kept a little bit more sidewall on it. Naturally, that helps if you're doing a forged crank, forged rod type setup. Having a little extra sidewall isn't a bad thing, but I think some people focus more on the cubic inches, where this day and age with the support of the aftermarket items we have available, what matters is the actual internals. I know if you read fine print, there's some setups out there where they talk about a 411, and in the fine print they say a 411 cubic inch with 2,000 horsepower capable pistons. The pistons might be, but if you actually look at the rods that are H-beam rods and a forged crank, that's not 2,000 horsepower capable. So at the end of the day, it more so matters on the actual internals, machining, and balancing that's done for that short block than the cubic inches. So, yeah, maybe if anything, like a 420, right? And get that billet rod, leave it, a little smaller piston, but it's more the components inside. Like I said, my car made, 1,500 plus twin turbo all day long, constant abuse. We actually found out I cracked one of the manifolds almost in half. That was a surprise to us. But that is more important in regards to the actual components used for the internals. So keep that in mind. Don't fall for anything other than verifying what those internals are and make sure that they are stronger than the goal of horsepower you have. You don't want a goal of 1,000 horsepower and then put 1,100 or 1,200 crank capable horsepower rods, pistons, crank in there, because you're going to be right there on the edge of it. Okay, so the actual components inside, billet rod, billet crank, got nothing to worry about. 426 it all day, right? So I would take that any day over the week of just a basic forged rod and crank setup. So, but good question, because it is asked a lot. So why do people say using the 5.7 block is better than the 6.4 block? Because the internet said so somewhere. Somebody took that and then they started spreading that all over. So the fact of the matter is, if you're talking blocks, the 5.7 block is, yes, going to be one of the weakest. Now, naturally, it has the smallest bore from the factory on it. So in regards to needing to bore it out and build it, it is what it is, right? But the fact is, the BGE block in a factory block setup comparison is superior in every way, shape, or form. So when you reference a 6.4 block, it also depends on what year 6.4, right? Because 18 and newer, some trucks a little earlier, but 18 and newer 392s were BGE blocks. So I would take that any day of the week over that of a 5.7. But a lot of it is depending on the bore, the stroke that you want. Sometimes, 392s are beat up real bad, and you have to bore them over, or they've been bored already, and then you're done after you bore it once, and then you want to rebuild it or stroke it even more, and you can't. You have to get a new block. So I don't know why or where that started, but that's not true at all. The BGE is superior to all. Once it gets down to like a 392 or a 5.7 prior to the BGE, they're all iron blocks. They're very close to the same, you know what I mean? And guys have made good power out of both of them. But the BGE is the one you're going to want for big power. But I've made 1,000 plus out of a 5.7 that was stroked to a 392 and forged correctly. I've done it on non-BGE 392 blocks. So, but the BGE is superior in the comparison of the talk. I don't know where this 5.7 talk came from, but that's pretty interesting. Average labor for a Hellcat swap on a Jeep 5.7. We get asked, what is the average labor all the time? The fact is, there's so many variables with that, right? It depends on how many miles are on your car. It's going to depend on what your horsepower goals are. It can range anywhere from 40 hours to 80 hours, depending on what all you're going to put into it. So that's another thing to take in consideration, right? Like I said, if you have a 5.7 Jeep and you're throwing a Hellcat in and you're essentially almost doubling the horsepower what you had before, understand not everything in it's going to be happy. Because I'm going to tell you, a lot of the guys that want to do swaps into their older chassis don't have low miles on them. So now you're going to just double the horsepower and expect everything else to be the same or be okay with it. You run the risk of it. I can't tell you how many times we add 200-300 horsepower to somebody's engine with 100,000 plus miles on their car, and all of a sudden their transmission goes out a week later and they're upset about it. Or rear end fails or an axle snaps or something along those lines, right? Everything on the car is worn and you just doubled the horsepower. Be prepared. So there is no flat rate answer. We are not a Hellcat swap specialty shop, so understand that for us to take a project on like that, it's just going to be my hourly time and material based on what it is. There are some people out there on TikTok, YouTube, stuff like that's their specialty. They just do Hellcat swaps. If you have a specialty and that's all you do, they're going to be cheaper, absolutely. But from my standpoint, it's not a cheap swap in any way, shape, or form, because we're going to take our time and make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's during the disassembly process. So just do keep that in mind when it comes down to it. Let's see what else. Yeah, Chuck, about swapping your 2011 to a Hellcat blower. Yeah, I think you made the better choice with the blower you have. I know you have the heating issues, but I think it's a far superior blower for the application, and it's bolt-on, ready to go. So, yes, limited on horsepower, right? Because you got the 6 rib, but it is what it is. So, and yes, Jeff, I agree. The Magnum should have come Hellcat swap. Hellcat equipped. Same thing with the 300. They dropped the ball there, but it is what it is. How do you become a millionaire in racing? You start as a billionaire. It's the only way, because you're just going to lose money. It's kind of funny you say that. You want a compound booster setup just to be at 900 wheel horsepower on the street and be able to turn it up for the track to be an 8-second beast. That is the beauty of compound boost, or any type of turbo setup where turbos are involved, right? You can have a boost setting of 900 horsepower depending on where you start, and then turn it up 1,300 depending, again, where you're at. That's one of those things where, understanding the pros and cons of doing the compound. We have several videos on it. I'm a big fan of it for 90% of the people out there in regards to street car versus strip car, or street strip car, just due to the flexibility. Absolutely. The low to mid-range power is outstanding still. Top end is like a turbo, so it's a win-win. But when you really start pushing it for big numbers, that's where it starts hold you back a little bit. But yeah, compound boost is the way to go for that. You have it on basic wastegate setting on a otherwise stock vehicle, and you make 750, 800 wheel, can run pump gas. And then, we normally set up 4 to 6 boost settings to our customer cars, ranging up to 11, 1200, depending on the overall setup, right? So definitely a good option out there. Blower cars, you're stuck, or you have to change pulleys and belts and stuff like that. Turbos, you do it from the driver's seat, baby. Just hit that button up or down and get the boost you want. And what about a 426 H-beam for 411 H-beam? Again, H-beam, I-beam, that's only one portion of it. Forged versus billet, so on and so forth. Like, I would take a billet H-beam over a forged I-beam, right? So again, it's the materials and the overall performance that you're going for, and the setup too. So it really comes down to horsepower goals. Can you make stupid power out of both of them? Absolutely, but I think I did again. I'm sorry. I'll go to timeout after this. Okay. Okay. All right. So it really just comes down to your horsepower goals. I've installed all of them from 392, 394, 396, 405, 411, 420, 426, 432s. I mean, I've done it. I've done all of them, and all are capable of big power. It's more so the internals. If you have the same components in regards to brand and everything from 426 to 411, I'm fine with either one, and I'm not going to say one's more reliable than the other. Okay, so that like I said, when you're talking that 15 cubic inches, it's not going to change anything. It really is so minimal at that point. You got a lot of material out in regards to the bore anyway, so really, if there's a failure or anything does happen, you're kind of needing a new block anyway. So really, it does not matter. It's more so the actual parts used, the brands that are used. So that should be the question, not the cubic inches. So what are the challenges of putting a BGE into an early LX? Challenges, the only thing is, depending on the computer being run, it's going to be more so the crank and the tone ring for RPM pickup. And like, you know, timing chain cover, stuff like that. It bolts right in. The motor mounts and all of that is exactly the same. It's just kind of the small little things like the reluctor wheel inside. And more so that type of, you know, you're most likely going to have like MDS plugs and stuff like that.
Daddy,
but what
is this movie?
I don't know. It's Blue's Clues. You don't like Blue's Clues?
No.
Oh, well, you put it on.
And put it on by yourself.
We tune all the time. A lot of guys do, you know, 392 swaps, Hellcat swaps in them and things like that. It's very, very minor in regards to what's needed. There's actually a couple kits that are available out there that basically supply you everything you need to be able to do the retro swap. So, yeah, it's not as bad as one would think. So, yep, I'm going to get a timeout. Don't worry. Let's see. You have a 13 Ram. You swapped to 392. Want to add supercharger or turbo? What's your thoughts? I mean, if you're asking me if you want a turbo or supercharger, you know, if you haven't seen, my tagline is turbo the world, right? Especially out of a big old pickup truck, they create a lot of load, so lag is reduced. They spool quick. Nothing's more efficient than a proper turbo setup. My TRX is twin turboed. I gutted the blower even, took that out of the equation because I'm a big fan of turbos. But again, depends on your goals. Depends on your horsepower goals, your budget goals, and actually a proper turbo setup is going to cost more than that of a supercharger setup. So superchargers are capable of achieving horsepower as well. So just understand that if it's a stock piston setup in there, you're going to have to be careful just due to the delicacy of it. Turbos are a little easier on all components. So everything kind of points to that. That's my opinion. But it depends on your horsepower goals. So really choose that. Choose the shop and follow their guidance on it. You know, the way we do it is if somebody just has a horsepower goal and they really don't know what they want to do, we will tell them which ways they can get there and let them choose the pros and cons of each. Example, a PD blower is nice for trucks because they're heavy. So where they need a lot of assistance is low end torque to get out of the hole, right? So PD blowers are nice, you know, because they have a lot of low and mid-range power. But on the flip side, they're also pigs up top. No, you know, they're basically bricks going through the wind. So centrifugal blowers are nice because, you know, easier to launch and they just keep pulling at the big end. Turbos just have it all, but again, the cost. A lot of people get scared by the cost, and to each their own and the horsepower goal. But we prefer to throw turbos. Less maintenance, more efficient, make horsepower at less boost, so it's less strain. But there's an application for everybody. So, yeah. Supporting mods to get power to the ground. That's a great question. So, and again, it's going to be application specific, the type of power you're making. To give an example, I mean, I have a ton of, we'll say, Hellcats, right? Running mid to bottom nines with literally stock suspension, everything. The biggest component here is the wheel tire combination. So generally, if you start with a diff brace on any of these vehicles to make sure your differential doesn't blow up, next in line is going to be your axles, then drive shaft shortly after. So if you get that and you reinforce and have the ability to put the power down, the wheel tire combination is going to be the next thing. And then thereon after, again, depending, we go to the AED drag pack setup in regards to their suspension. Great quality stuff, works well. It was on our shop car, and you have to look no further. It's strong, lightweight, and has all the adjustability you need for a proper alignment, right? And now this is where it gets a little tricky. If you're a Hellcat powered vehicle or have a 392 that has the dynamic suspension into it, right? You know, that it's actually great from the factory. We put the DSC controller in a lot of our cars and customer cars. That's what, again, we had in our shop car. and cut 1.2, 1.3 60-foots with weighing over 4,700 pounds with no issues. And we did notice a big difference doing the DSC controller. So there is no technically need to swap out the factory components in regards to if you have those shocks and the spring setup. Now, if you don't have that luxury, then yes, you can go to a proper coilover setup or a drag like Viking coil setup that allows for adjustability for that. Suspension is one of those things that it takes a long time to truly get it dialed in. But yeah, that's where it's going to be. That's kind of the order we go, depending on the actual power you're making and what your ET goals are and how serious you are about it. Because I'll tell you, a race setup is not very street friendly if you do get it set it up right. That's why the Hellcats are so great with the fact they have the adjustable suspension on it. You know what I mean? So do take advantage of that if you have it. I see a lot of guys. All right, we can go potty. I'll wrap it up, okay? So, should you do a one-piece drive shaft or a red-eye drive shaft for better upgrade? Last question. I'm a big fan of two pieces as long as you can keep them alive. Generally about 950 wheel horsepower is where I see these drive shafts live for a good while. We have several over 1,000 wheel horsepower in the red-eye drive shaft. They will not live forever, but drivability is great. Vibrations are reduced, and they are strong. Where you go to a one-piece, you need the cradle lockouts, you feel the vibrations. They are strong, and they finally got them figured out. So, again, street versus strip. If you're a race car like my shop car was, one piece and lock it out. But, all right. Potty time, guys. Thank you for checking in. We'll be back next week, back in the shop. So leave more questions if we didn't answer them, and we'll get back to you guys next week. Have a good weekend.